So we have four and hopefully 5 internships this year. So the first one's with CCR in New York. The second is with Human Rights First in New York, and they're really different organisations. CCR is really very very much.
Sorry.
Come on in. Welcome to the presentation. It's hard to sneak in the back when there's only 4. So CCR is a really activist organisation. They basically do litigation, but it's often strategic litigation. So they often run cases that they know aren't going to win for a greater strategic purpose. Right at the moment, they're taking the Catholic Church by the Holy See, the Vatican, to various UN bodies, including the Committee Against Torture, trying to get a finding against them for child abuse, for institutional sexual abuse. They run a heap of cases on Guantanamo Bay, and one of their cases at the moment is trying to shut it down. So just starting, so just talking about the CCR for those who just came in. So it's a very intense work environment. The people we've sent there are generally academically strong, and you're expected to just work like a beast if you go to CCR. They have a kind of almost sleep under the desk culture, but it's incredible. Like the people who've sent there absolutely love it because of the cases they're doing. As I said, the student we sent last year worked on the Catholic child abuse case, and also on the last 2 have worked on the landmark Kiobel case, which is a corporations and human rights case. The work that they do is incredible. I would think that, you know, the person who goes this year could be working on their case to try and shut Guantanamo Bay down. So by all reports, an amazing organisation. People have a life-changing experience when they go there. The other one in New York is Human Rights First, and it's in their refugee protection program. They do a lot of human rights stuff, but their human rights, the refugee protection program, it's kind of like being at the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, but in New York, and with an entirely different caseload made up of sort of Caribbean and Central and South American applicants. Or not only, you know, they certainly come from other places as well. They do specifically want people who have refugee experience, so either you've studied refugee law or worked at somewhere like ASRC or the Refugee Immigration Legal Centre or somewhere else like that. EROR, as you can guess from the name, is a women's rights organisation. They're based in Kuala Lumpur, but the intern who goes on that also does a side trip to Geneva, and that's sort of the highlight of the internship. It's really amazing because it's sort of, you don't usually think of going to Geneva to get grassroots human rights experience, but you go to the CEDAW session, so that's the Committee for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and a few times a year what happens if you're not familiar with the system, the countries that have signed up to CEDAW, the convention, are reviewed every 3 or 4 years. I'm not sure what the gap is for CEDAW. And so at each session they'll hear sort of 8 to 10 countries. There'll be a report by the country, reports by NGOs, and then the committee will deliver a final report about what a country needs to do to improve their human rights record. And what EROR does is they go to Geneva and they bring activists from the countries that are under review at that meeting to Geneva. And they say, you know, a lot of the real work in Geneva is done in the cafeteria. You know, if you think of the committee members on CEDAW, they're overworked and under-resourced. And they often get big long reports. Say you're hearing, say Taiwan is up at the next session. You might be hearing on Taiwan, you're as a committee member, you've got a 100-page report from NGOs in Taiwan that you're not really going to read. But if one of those NGOs turns up in Geneva and asks to have lunch with you, and then they take you through the issues, you know, that really changes the way that the committee members, that they just have a better understanding when they go into the meeting, and it changes the way a final report is written. So in Geneva, you've got these groups that come together. It's very dynamic. They have workshops. They get together and hear each other's stories. They lobby members of the committee. It's meant to be just quite an amazing, sort of really uplifting experience for the intern who goes there. The fourth one, mystery internship, I can't announce it yet. We've agreed with another organisation based in Geneva that will host an intern there. That they want to do it, but we've just got to work out if they have the slot in the time that we want it, which is either over the summer break or first semester next year. I hope I'll hear overnight, if not in the next few days, and then fingers crossed we'll be able to add that one. So the important thing is, I don't want to get your hopes up too much in case it doesn't run, but you would have all got an email just as a student at Monash. We won't email that to everyone, but we will email it to our student members. So if you're not a member, you try and sign up. You just go to the front page of our website. I think we'll do that because we don't want to spam people who are not interested in these things at all. And then the other one is one specific for Indigenous students, and it's a bit different to the others. It was initiated by the Australian delegation, the Australian government's delegation to the Human Rights Council, and they would like to host an Indigenous student who can be from law, but also from any other faculty. So unlike the other ones which are limited to law, this is for Indigenous students from across the university. They'll attend the March session of the council and also do preparatory work in the lead up to it. The funding numbers on the website, so that's them there. Basically, you might be surprised to know that going and living in Geneva is significantly more expensive than living in New York. So that's reflected in those numbers. And then the ERA one is kind of a hybrid number based on living in KL, which is pretty cheap, and living in Geneva, which is really expensive. And now, since last year, travel insurance is provided by the university for anyone who goes overseas for an internship, and it's worth you knowing that even if you don't get one of these and you want to organise something before you finish your studies, you are now covered. You can arrange that with them in advance. And you really just need to let them know. And that saves, $400 or $500 if you're going for 3 months, depending on where you're going to, or even more. So the criteria for the legal internships are they're on the website. Basically, you need to have a unit to go when you after you come back, and that's these criteria are largely driven by the law faculty, who gives us some of the funding for this project. There are a bunch of compulsory subjects which are listed on the website. And then that third bullet point there, you need to either have done a human rights subject like international human rights, that's the kind of gold standard, or human rights in Australian law, or women's rights, another one of those subjects, or demonstrate that you know about human rights either through your community involvement or other interests. We try to leave it flexible. The best is if you've done a subject, but it's not the only way. And certainly over the years, I've had people who've just finished international human rights who don't seem to really get human rights, and other people who haven't done any human rights subjects who seem to know it really well. So there's no one way, but that's sort of generally in the course of looking at your CV and your cover letter, and then in an interview, we're trying to work out, do you know enough about the law for us to send you? You need a GPA of 60 and not previously have been given law faculty funding. The Indigenous internship, basically you also 1 unit to complete, have an Indigenous Australian background. The same kind of demonstrated interest in human rights obviously without the law subject if you're not in law. And because it's the Australian government, there will be a probity check beforehand. I'm not sure exactly what they check for, but you can probably guess. The other criteria is that we do like you to be involved beforehand. While you're over there, we get our interns to write blogs, which is great, and people read them at the time. They also become a useful resource for later years. Like if you are going to apply, you should be looking at our interns blog, which you can, if you just Google Castan interns blog, you'll find it easily enough. It's great. They give great information about the kind of things you do on assignment. And they get access from all over the world. People from elsewhere going to do internships for those organisations kind of then use our blogs as a kind of reference source. You do a report when we get home that we put in the newsletter, that kind of stuff. You have to get your own visa if you're an international student, not do it during semester. And sometimes other organisations have specific criteria. I mentioned the human rights first, wanting someone who has specific refugee experience. So this bit, the rest of it, I just want to talk a bit about what we're actually looking for when you write your application and then get an interview. And that's pretty aiming high, but we're looking for the next generation of human rights leaders. So we are looking for really special people, and there are a lot who apply. I mean, it's quite amazing. I think, I can't remember the exact number last year, but I think once we've done our interviews, I thought I'd be really happy to send 18 people, you know, for our, whatever we had last year, 5 or 6 spots. But, you know, people who have a real passion for human rights, people who have great knowledge, who present really well. And if you're kind of thinking about what you're going to do after this, we're looking for people who are committed to human rights, but no matter what their field is. And so if you look at, for example, our first group left in 2005, there were 4 of them. Shahan Murray's had a really interesting career in Victorian government. She worked with the police for a while, and she's now at the Refugee Review Tribunal. Linda Gyorky did commercial law after she finished, got her articles and did a couple of years at a law firm out in Dandenong, and now works at the Inner North Legal Centre, which used to be North Melbourne Legal Service. Jessie Taylor is a barrister, you know, who does sort of commercial matters and probably too much pro bono for her own good, but does a lot of asylum seeker pro bono. And Sophia Kagan has done work with the UN, is now with the International Labour Organisation, so she's working overseas. And we've got past interns who are in commercial law, past interns who are in working in government, like in Attorney Generals up in Canberra, stuff like that. And you might think, why would we want to send someone who ends up working in a commercial law firm? But you know, they're huge drivers of pro bono work in Australia, law firms. And if we see someone who's genuinely committed to human rights going to a commercial law firm, I feel good that if they stay there and progress up the chain, they're going to be the people when they become partners who are driving the culture of pro bono in a firm. So there's a million ways to structure a career, you know, that can bring human rights into it. It doesn't have to be that you're working at the Human Rights Law Centre or here with us. But you do get an intrinsic sense of what people are interested in from what they've done and kind of what they're planning to do. When you apply with your letter and when you do an interview, we want to know why you're interested in human rights. And a lot of people say, oh, you know, I'm interested in human rights because I worked at Amnesty. But that doesn't actually tell me much. A lot of people do things, you know, to bolster their CV, or maybe they just thought they'd have a go at something. Maybe they ended up filing and photocopying an amnesty and didn't really learn anything. You know, it's not enough to just say that. A lot of people say I'm passionate about human rights, but then I kind of struggle. Like that's the cover letter. I'm really passionate about human rights, but then I struggle to see where that passion is coming from. And that's really what I'm interested in. When you write a cover letter, I've got your CV. In fact, your cover letter is the last thing I read. So I know, by the time I read your cover letter, I know what you've done. So you've only got a page. Don't waste your time writing all the things you've done, because that's in your CV. I want to get an understanding for why it is that you're interested in human rights and this particular internship. You know, why for me is the fundamental question, because I'm looking at choosing people who I think are going to go on to have a future in human rights, and that's how I get a sense of whether you're serious about it or not. So you tell us where your passion comes from. You know, we've had people whose parents fled apartheid South Africa, others who grew up in India or Pakistan and witnessed extreme poverty, some who travelled and experienced poverty for the first time, others who just had parents who kind of introduced themselves to it. People have all different ways, but understanding yourself where it comes from helps you to explain it to us. And the other way to explain that you are interested in human rights and that you're passionate about human rights is to show, particularly in your interview, that you know about human rights. this might sound really simple, but if you don't know much about human rights, you can't be that passionate about it. If you're passionate about it, you're going to read about it. You're going to, hopefully volunteer if you've got time, and you're going to know. You're going to have a great base of knowledge. So when we are deciding who we're going to send, things we're looking at community service. Volunteering is great. If you haven't done it, it doesn't rule you out, but you do need to explain it. There are really good reasons why people don't volunteer. One of them is that they just don't have enough money. And we don't want to rule out anyone because they don't have the time to volunteer on top of their workload need to work. But we need to hear that explanation because, that might not be the reason why you don't do it. As I said, we're looking for an interest in human rights, and as I said, knowledge is interest. You should know about this stuff. And yes, we do take into account academic record. It's not the determining factor. By the time you get through your interview, it's probably less relevant than it is when we are looking, in the first instance for who we're going to interview. But it does certainly come into play when we've got perhaps two people who have studied similar subjects, have a similar level of community service, and good interest in human rights. And it does happen. Like a lot of you guys are travelling similar paths. You're doing a lot of volunteer work. You're studying the same subjects. Then it can come down to academic record, but it is towards the lower end. The other thing is it's pretty obvious, but show you know about the position you're applying for. Make sure you've really researched the organisation and what they do. And the other thing, the third bullet point, it should actually just be a totally separate point. And this is just an interview technique thing. Answer the questions really expansively in the interview. Most of you, if not all of you, be Australians, and we have a culture in Australia of not wanting to bore people. A lot of people tend to, in conversation, keep their answers as short. I don't want to bore you by just going on and on and on about, if you ask me, do you enjoy studying law, I'll probably give you a really brief answer because actually it's quite boring. And people carry that just natural cultural way that we converse into an interview. When you're asked a question, you really almost want to bore us with the answer, because to come back to this idea that knowledge is passion, and also competence. Knowledge is, indicates that you have the competence to do the job if we send you. Just being able to really talk for a reasonable amount of time about something, and that's not waffling, actually being able to say something meaningful. Maybe even go on a tangent that illustrates your point, say something, give an illustration, all this kind of classic stuff for interview techniques. It's really important because we have set questions generally, and we will try to draw you out a bit if your answers are short, but generally if you choose to give short answers, then that's pretty much, there's only so much we can do about it before we have to go, all right, we're not getting much here. So that's a really important thing to think about when you're preparing for an interview. To give you an idea, we do ask reasonably hard questions in the interview, but they are related to the internship. The first three, I guarantee you will ask these three now. So, what interests you in general about human rights? And this comes back to that question of where's your passion come from? Why? If you've got a passion in human rights, you should be able to explain where it comes from and why you're interested in it. And then the second question we'll ask is what particular areas of human rights interest you? And we do often get people who say, I'm really interested in asylum seekers. So there's a real chance right now for you already to go, all right, I know what I'm going to say for those two questions and I'm going to speak expansively about them. And the third is why you're applying for this particular internship. That's another really simple one that you should be able to answer well. And I just thought, in relation to each of the internships that we have, I thought I'd just show you one question. Just give you an idea of the kind of questions we ask. So I'm not saying we'll ask these ones this year, we do try to mix them up a bit, but should a country's history and culture warrant the disparate treatment of women? So this is about cultural relativism. You know, they're a Muslim country, they're different to us. Should they be able to treat their women differently because of cultural reasons? Are people who buy a ticket to the USA or smuggle themselves in asylum seekers? What is habeas corpus? If you're going to go to CCR, then that's a question you should know. You should also know the basics of the US Bill of Rights and just the basic way that it works, because the CCR is very much about the American legal system. And if you're going to Geneva, you really should know the difference between the Human Rights Committee and the Human Rights Council. If you don't, you should really know that. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't. So it's just an example of the questions we ask. They're tough, but they're also related to the internship that you're doing. So if you're looking at going to ERA and doing women's rights, you're not going to get asked what habeas corpus is. That leads me to the next point. You can apply for 3 internships if you want, or for 1 or 2. And it's it can be a bit of a difficult question how many you apply for. I think sometimes people apply for 3 and don't have the time to adequately prepare for each one of them and end up kind of not going as well in that sort of specific stage of the interview. On the other hand, sometimes we have someone apply for a couple of positions or 1 position and we think, oh, I wish they'd applied for that one, because maybe they're just kind of the second best for this one, but it would fit here. So you've got to decide for yourself. What I would say is apply for as many as you think you can properly prepare for. And if you feel like one of them is too far outside of your comfort zone, don't apply for it, because you're just going to impair your ability to apply, to prepare really well for interviews on the other ones. The application, the stuff there's on the website about what you need to provide, and I would just reiterate the letter. Don't regurgitate your CV. Really make it about why you're interested in human rights and why you're interested in this internship, and I'll be able to, we'll see what you've done based on your CV. And I would say one other thing about the CV, and I'm sure you guys by now have had a bit of experience of preparing CVs. You should tailor your CV to a particular position. So if you've got one that you've just used for clerkship applications, it might not really emphasise the things that you want, and you might want to keep the same things in but move them around to really emphasise, say, your volunteer record or something like that. And one other thing that does happen every year, once or twice, someone will mention in their letter, oh, I had that really life-changing experience where I went and worked with street kids in Guatemala, and I won't be able to find it on their CV. It just won't be on there. Or it's a bullet point under interests at the end, where it's kind of like playing guitar, watching footy and working with street children in Guatemala. Like, that's just, first of all, I might miss it, and second, what does that tell me about how well you value what you did over there when you don't even sort of put it up the front and centre of your CV? So always emphasise the strongest things about you, about your work experience and your study in your CV, as they are, the strength for this particular internship, which, as I say, are very different to the things that you might emphasise when you're going for a job in a law firm. All right, I think that's about all. The timeline is also on the website. The thing to note is that if you do get an internship, we have a half-day sort of cross-cultural training, photos and lunch on the 10th of October this year. I'll leave that up for a moment. So, that's all I wanted to say. Are there any questions from you guys about any of this? Yeah.
With the prerequisite subjects, are they required to be completed now by the time of application or by the time?
No, we're assuming you're going to pass. So, so if you're enrolled for this semester, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah.
Would you recommend, if we've done subjects that we would consider to be human rights, say in arts or more sort of philosophy-based ones?
Yeah.
Would you recommend that somewhere in our CV or cover letter we sort of explain how that relates to human rights?
Yeah, and whether you mention it, I would say you can put them in your CV just under your arts. I've studied in particular these subjects. whether you mention them in your cover letter depends what point you're trying to get across. Like, don't mention them just to mention them. Like if they're good to know because they're human rights related, put them in the CV. If there's a point you want to make about, well, I ended up doing a whole essay on this thing because it so fascinated me and that shows why I'm interested in human rights, then mention it in your cover letter as well.
I just have one other question about the law faculty funding. I inquired about this a year ago, I think. So when you do PARO, you automatically get a few $100 like law faculty funding.
Yeah.
Kathy Meredith suggested that would probably be okay, and you would probably get whatever the funding was minus the amount you got for PARO. Is that
right?
Still good?
I think so. I do remember now that you mentioned it, this issue coming up last year, and it was fine.
Okay.
But I'm just going to, I'll chat with Kathy about that. Just so, and I might update the FAQs page, something about that. So that's the general funding if you've been a part of that. Cool. Any other questions? No? Oh, cool.
Do you have any idea about how likely it will be that certain internships are offered in future years, or is it?
Yeah, look, these ones are pretty much all our really long-serving ones. In any given year, it depends how much funding we have, and it's always a challenge to convince people to fund it because we actually the amount that we now get from the law faculty is tiny, so most of it comes from external funders. But CCR and Human Rights First and ERA, we've been with them for at least 5 years in each of them, and since the very beginning in the case of Human Rights First. So we'd be very keen to keep them on board. So I would say can't guarantee, but we're pretty confident that those three will be around next year. Go.
Sorry, 3 questions.
That's all right.
I kind of looked at the Centre for Constitutional Rights website. One thing that wasn't 100% clear to me was how much of their work is actually in constitutional law and how much is protecting constitutional rights via other areas of law?
I don't really know to be what the breakdown is, but they certainly work through both these, and they don't just do constitutional cases. So the Kyogle case I mentioned before, which was about corporations and human rights, was a case under something called the Alien Tort Statute. So they do use other statutes where it's relevant.